Gregory Harrison had once been one of the wealthiest men in the world, his name synonymous with power, influence, and prestige. A self-made billionaire, he had built his empire from the ground up, acquiring vast business interests that spanned industries from real estate to technology. His life had been a whirlwind of high-profile meetings, luxury, and endless possibilities. But everything changed the day he was involved in a car accident that left him paralyzed from the neck down. The accident not only shattered Gregory physically, but it also broke him emotionally. The man who once commanded boardrooms with ease now found himself confined to a wheelchair, unable to move most of his body, reliant on others for even the simplest tasks. The stark contrast between his former life and his new reality was more than he could bear. The sprawling mansion that had once been filled with laughter and energy now stood silent, echoing only the lonely sounds of Gregory's breathing and the soft hum of medical equipment. His family, who had always been distant, showed little interest in his well-being. His wife, Catherine, often retreated into her own world, spending more time with friends than tending to her husband. His children, busy with their own lives, dropped in occasionally, offering obligatory words of sympathy, but never staying long, enough to make a difference. It became painfully clear to Gregory that, in the eyes of his family, his worth had diminished. No longer the powerful businessman who had provided them with everything they could ever need, he had become a burden, someone who was no longer of value. For months, Gregory endured the cold and indifferent care of hired nurses. They came and went, never staying long enough to form a connection, performing their tasks mechanically and with little empathy. Each day felt like an endless cycle of loneliness and frustration. The rich, powerful man who had once commanded attention was now invisible, nothing more than an afterthought to those around him. As time passed, Gregory's anger grew. He resented his body, his helplessness, and the way the world seemed to have abandoned him. The luxury and success he had once enjoyed now seemed hollow, and he began to wonder whether his life had any meaning left. It was during this bleak period that he received a call from an agency that offered home care assistance. They had found a caregiver who, according to their records, might be the right fit for him. Her name was Sarah, and she had a past that seemed far removed from the world Gregory inhabited. Sarah had spent years in prison for a crime she didn't commit, a wrongful conviction that had cost her much of her youth and dignity. When she was finally released, she found herself struggling to rebuild her life. She faced prejudice and rejection at every turn, unable to find stable work due to her criminal record. Her options were limited, but she refused to give up. Sarah was determined to prove that her past did not define her and that she could make a positive impact in the world, despite the obstacles she faced. When Gregory first heard about Sarah, he was skeptical. How could someone with such a history possibly be the right person to care for him? He was used to the finest professionals, people with impeccable resumes and polished manners. The thought of hiring someone with a criminal background felt like a step too far, especially given his fragile emotional state. But desperation made him reconsider. At that point, he had little to lose. He needed help, and if Sarah could prove herself, perhaps she could offer him a semblance of human connection that he had been missing for so long. Sarah, too, had her doubts. She had never worked with someone as wealthy and influential as Gregory. She had spent most of her adult life in the shadows, trying to rebuild her life after being wrongly incarcerated. The idea of caring for someone like Gregory, a man who had everything she had ever dreamed of, was intimidating. But she saw it as an opportunity, a chance to prove not just to the world, but to herself, that she could overcome the stigma of her past. The first few days were tense and awkward. Gregory, still bitter and disillusioned, was difficult to manage. He snapped at Sarah for the smallest things, angry at the world for what had happened to him. He was ungrateful, rude, and cold. But Sarah, with her quiet strength and unshakable determination, didn't flinch. She listened, spoke gently, and carried out her duties with patience and grace. She didn't try to win his approval, but instead focused on doing her job to the best of her ability. And slowly, something began to change. Gregory, who had initially treated her with disdain, started to notice Sarah's kindness. He began to understand that she wasn't just doing her job, she genuinely cared. Her resilience in the face of her own struggles sparked something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. In the days that followed, he found himself looking forward to her visits, enjoying their conversations, and even laughing at the dry humor she often shared. It was a small thing, but it was the beginning of a shift. Little did they both know, this was just the start of an unexpected and life-changing journey for them both. As the days turned into weeks, the awkwardness that had once defined the relationship between Gregory and Sarah began to fade. At first, their interactions were strictly professional. Sarah was there to do a job, and Gregory made it clear that he wasn't interested in anything beyond that. He resented his circumstances and the people around him. His body, which had once been his greatest asset, was now a prison, and he felt a deep, constant frustration at his inability to control it. His family was no help. They treated him as a shadow of his former self, merely tolerating him in his weakened state. But Sarah was different. She never looked at him with pity or disdain. She treated him as a person, not a figurehead. She spoke to him as if his mind, his soul, were still as sharp and vibrant as they had been before the accident. In the beginning, Gregory kept his distance, choosing to retreat into his thoughts or immerse himself in the work that still piled up on his desk. He was a man who was used to being in charge, to making decisions that impacted not only his own life, but the lives of thousands of others. Now, everything was out of his hands. He was dependent on others for his basic needs. Sarah, however, never complained. She didn't expect anything from him other than cooperation. She didn't try to push him to open up, nor did she rush to fill the silence that often hung between them. Instead, she let him be, waiting for the moment when he would choose to break the silence on his own. It wasn't long before Gregory began to notice something that had previously eluded him. There was a quiet strength in Sarah's demeanor. She wasn't just performing a task, she was offering him something more. A presence that had nothing to do with obligation. Sarah had been through unimaginable hardship in her life, yet she never allowed bitterness or anger to taint her spirit. Gregory found himself intrigued by her resilience. He began to watch her closely, how she moved with purpose, how she spoke with kindness, how she never seemed to rush or get frustrated, even when things didn't go according to plan. She seemed to have an endless well of patience and compassion. That made her more than just a caregiver. One evening, as Sarah helped Gregory adjust in his chair, She smiled gently at him, noticing how he was staring out the window at the fading light. "It's a beautiful evening," she said softly, not expecting much in return. To her surprise, Gregory didn't respond with his usual grunt or dismissive glance. Instead, he looked at her, his gaze softening. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something other than frustration and anger. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Sarah, sensing the change in the air, continued with her tasks, moving around him with a calm grace. As she did, Gregory's mind began to wander. He thought about Sarah's life, about her years in prison for a crime she hadn't committed. He knew she'd never shared many details, but the bits and pieces he had gathered made him realize just how unfair the world had been to her. He had seen people like Sarah, the downtrodden, the forgotten, many times in his life, but he had never truly looked at them, not the way he was looking at her now. There was something raw and real about her, a truth that was hard to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between them deepened. They began to talk more, sometimes about trivial things, books they had read, the music they liked, the weather. But occasionally, their conversations ventured into deeper territory. Gregory found himself opening up to Sarah in ways he hadn't done with anyone else in years. He told her about his childhood, his struggles with his family, and the weight of expectations that had always hung over him. Sarah listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. She simply let him speak, offering nothing but the sound of her steady, compassionate voice when he finished. And then, Sarah began to share her own story. She told him about her wrongful conviction, the years she spent locked away in prison, and the toll it had taken on her. She didn't paint herself as a victim, though. Instead, she spoke with the kind of dignity that made Gregory realize how much she had grown despite the injustice she had faced. She told him how she had fought to rebuild her life, even when the world had closed every door to her. In Sarah's eyes, Gregory saw a strength he could never have imagined in someone who had been through what she had. It was something that moved him deeply. There was a moment one evening, as they sat together in silence, when Gregory realized just how much Sarah had changed him. He wasn't just learning to accept help from her. He was learning to trust her. She had become more than a caregiver to him. She had become someone he admired. And slowly, very slowly, Gregory began to see a future that wasn't defined by his limitations, but by the connections he had with people like Sarah. He had always believed that power and control were the only things that mattered. But now he realized that the true measure of strength was in human connection, the way two people, despite all their differences, could find common ground and help each other rise. What started as a simple caregiver-patient relationship was turning into something far more significant. Gregory began to look forward to the moments when Sarah would visit, and he found himself sharing his thoughts and dreams with her, things he had never discussed with anyone else before. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen, not as a billionaire or a former mogul, but as a man who was trying to find his way back to himself. And in Sarah, he found someone who believed in him, someone who saw his worth not in the empire he had built, but in the man he could still become. Weeks passed, and the bond between Gregory and Sarah continued to grow. What had once been a relationship based solely on necessity his need for a caregiver and her need for work, had transformed into something deeper. Gregory began to feel a shift in himself, something he had never expected. For the first time since his accident, he started to feel truly alive again. There was a connection with Sarah, a sense of human warmth that had eluded him for so long. She wasn't just caring for him, she was offering him companionship, understanding, and even hope. One evening, as Sarah was helping him with his exercises, Gregory, who had grown more comfortable around her, began to open up in a way he hadn't before. He knew he was at a crossroads in his life, torn between holding on to the bitterness that had defined his world since the accident and embracing the new sense of peace Sarah had helped him find. For so long, Gregory had been consumed by anger, frustration, and regret. His days had been filled with thoughts of what he had lost, the empire, his health, and his former way of life. But Sarah's presence had brought a different perspective, one that made him question everything he had once believed. "Sarah," Gregory said, his voice softer than usual, "do you ever think about what might have been? If your life had gone differently, do you think it would have been better?" Sarah paused, clearly not expecting the question. She had been so focused on taking care of him that she hadn't thought much about herself lately. Her own past was something she had learned to live with, even if it still haunted her in subtle ways. But Gregory's question struck a chord, and after a long moment of reflection, she finally answered. "I used to think about that a lot," she said, her voice steady but thoughtful. "But now, I think I've learned that it's not about what might have been. It's about what you make of what you have. Life isn't always fair, but you can still choose how you live it. I've had to rebuild from the ground up, and I don't regret a thing. I'm here now, and that's what matters." Her words were simple, but they had a profound impact on Gregory. He was used to thinking in terms of what he had lost, the deals that never came to fruition, the opportunities that slipped away, the life that had been taken from him. But Sarah was different. She didn't dwell on the past. She focused on the present, on the strength that came from accepting what had happened and making the best of it. It was a lesson Gregory had never fully understood, but in that moment, he felt something shift within him. Sarah continued, her tone more contemplative. "I could have spent my whole life feeling sorry for myself, about the years I lost, about the people who wronged me. But I chose not to. I chose to take control of what I could and make a better life for myself. And maybe that's something you can do too, Gregory. Maybe it's time to stop holding on to what's gone and start focusing on what you can do now." Gregory sat quietly, her words sinking in deeper than he expected. Sarah's life had been full of hardship. She had endured a wrongful conviction, lost years of her life in prison, and had to rebuild everything from scratch. Yet here she was, standing before him with nothing but determination in her eyes. She had made peace with her past and embraced the future. She was teaching him not just how to cope with his circumstances, but how to truly live again. For the first time since his accident, Gregory began to consider that his life might still hold meaning beyond his wealth and status. His body might be broken, but his mind, his spirit, could still soar. He began to think about the things he could do, the impact he could still make, not just through his businesses, but through his actions as a person. The idea of reclaiming. His empire no longer seemed like the only path to redemption. Perhaps the real path was in finding peace within himself and using his experiences to help others, to make a real difference in the world. That night, as Sarah helped him settle into bed, Gregory found himself thinking not just about the past, but about the future. He began to see the possibility of a new chapter in his life, one that wasn't defined by his accident or his wealth, but by the relationships he had, especially the one with Sarah. She had become more than just a caregiver to him. She had become a teacher, a guide, and a friend. And in that moment, Gregory realized that he was finally ready to let go of his anger and start embracing the life that was still in front of him. In the days that followed, Gregory made a conscious decision to change. He started focusing less on what he had lost and more on what he could gain by changing his mindset. He began working with Sarah, not just to recover physically, but to redefine what his life could be. He started exploring new passions, finding ways to use his influence for good, and slowly he began to let go of the past that had held him captive for so long. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to be the steady force that helped guide him. She had never expected that her job as a caregiver would lead to such a transformation, not just in Gregory, but in herself. As she saw him grow and change, she was reminded of the power of human connection and how, even in the darkest of times, two people could help each other find light. Together, they were beginning to build something more meaningful than either of them had ever imagined. The turning point had come, and it had changed everything. The connection between Gregory and Sarah continued to deepen, and Gregory's transformation seemed to be happening before Sarah's eyes. He was no longer the bitter, angry man who had first hired her. Instead, he was beginning to embrace the idea of a new beginning, one not defined by his wealth or his accident, but by the relationships he had and the impact he could make on the world. Sarah had been pivotal in this transformation. Her quiet wisdom, unwavering strength, and refusal to judge had given Gregory the courage to open up in ways he hadn't in years. But there was still something lurking beneath the surface. Something Gregory hadn't fully shared with her, a dangerous secret he was trying to keep hidden. It all began one rainy afternoon when Sarah was helping Gregory with his paperwork. She had been organizing his financial records and sorting through piles of documents that had been neglected for months. Gregory, despite his new attitude, still maintained a sense of control over everything in his life. But lately, Sarah had noticed a shift. He seemed distracted, preoccupied with something he wasn't talking about. His eyes often darted to the corner of his desk, where a locked drawer sat, always closed, always out of reach. One day, as she was cleaning the study and tidying up his workspace, Sarah found the drawer slightly ajar. It was unusual. Gregory had always been meticulous about keeping his private matters under lock and key. Curiosity got the better of her, and after a brief moment of hesitation, she decided to open it. What she found inside was unexpected. There was a folder, old and well-worn, containing detailed documents that looked far more personal than anything related to Gregory's medical or financial needs. The folder was filled with information about a business venture, but it was more than that. It was a plan, a calculated effort to regain control of his empire by destroying the very people he had once called family. Sarah could hardly believe what she was reading. The documents outlined a strategy that involved a series of manipulations, covert dealings, and betrayal. It wasn't just about recovering lost business assets or rebuilding wealth. It was about exacting revenge. Gregory had been planning to take down his own family, to undermine them and make them pay for abandoning him when he needed them most. The betrayal was shocking. Gregory's plan wasn't just ruthless, it was personal. The papers detailed how he intended to isolate his family from the business, using every tactic at his disposal, including legal maneuvering, manipulation of stock prices, and even subtle character assassination. The more Sarah read, the more disturbed she became. She knew Gregory had been hurt by his family's indifference, but it felt like something darker, something dangerous. Her heart raced as she quickly closed the folder and locked the drawer again. She couldn't shake the image of those documents, the cold, calculated nature of the plan. For a moment, she stood frozen, torn between the trust she had placed in Gregory and the horrifying reality of what he had been plotting. How had it come to this? Had all his progress, all the healing he had been doing, been a lie? Or was this a part of him that he had been hiding, a part that would never truly change? The next day, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what she had found. She knew she had to confront Gregory, but how could she? She had seen him open up to her in ways that showed vulnerability and pain. Was this the same man who had written those papers? Or was this a version of him that he was still keeping buried deep inside? Finally, the moment came. One evening, after he had finished his therapy session and Sarah was preparing to help him get settled, she gently broached the subject. "Gregory," she began, her voice steady but careful, "there's something I need to talk to you about." He looked up, his eyes wary. "What is it, Sarah?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I found something, a folder, and inside it, there was a plan, a business strategy. It wasn't just about the company, it was about your family. You've been planning to take them down." Gregory's face changed instantly. His features hardened, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might explode in anger. But instead, he just sat there, his gaze dropping to the floor, as if he had been waiting for this moment to come. "You weren't supposed to see that," Gregory said quietly. "It's not something I wanted anyone to know, especially not you." Sarah's heart broke as she saw the anguish in his eyes. He wasn't angry, he was ashamed. "Gregory, why?" she asked softly. "Why would you want to do this? You've been changing, and I thought we were moving forward." Gregory took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment before speaking, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't understand. My family, they abandoned me. When I needed them the most, they turned their backs on me. They saw me as weak, as nothing more than a burden, and all I wanted was for them to feel the way I felt, to understand the pain they caused. But now I see what it's doing to me. I've been holding on to this hatred, this desire for revenge for so long, and it's eating me up inside." Sarah felt a pang of empathy for him. She could understand his hurt, his anger at being rejected by the people he had given everything to. But she also knew that revenge would never heal his wounds. It would only deepen them. "Gregory," she said gently, "I know they hurt you, but this isn't the way to heal. Revenge doesn't make you whole, it just keeps you stuck in the past. You have to let go. You have to forgive, for your own sake, not for theirs." Gregory looked at her, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I don't know if I can, Sarah. I don't know if I can let go of all the years of pain." "You don't have to do it all at once," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Take it one step at a time. Let go of the anger. Focus on the future, not the past. You're not the same person you were before the accident, and you don't have to be the person your family expects you to be. You can be someone better, but you have to make that choice." Gregory sat silently for a long time, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. He knew she was right. Deep down, he understood that revenge wouldn't bring him peace, but it was going to take time to untangle the bitterness that had taken root in his heart. "I don't know where to start," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help you," Sarah replied, her eyes filled with warmth. "We'll figure it out together." It was the first time Gregory had felt truly hopeful about the future in a long time, and for the first time, he realized that healing wasn't just about his physical recovery. It was about letting go of the past and embracing the possibility of a better life. As the days turned into weeks, Gregory's recovery continued, but it wasn't without setbacks. His physical health was improving slowly, but the emotional scars left by his family's betrayal and his own plans for revenge were still fresh. He was beginning to see the truth in Sarah's words, that healing didn't just mean physical recovery, but also healing the wounds of the past. He had started the process of letting go of his anger and bitterness, but it wasn't easy. Then, one evening, things took an unexpected turn. Gregory began feeling unwell. His chest ached, and his breath grew shallow. Sarah, who had grown deeply concerned about him during the past few months, immediately called his doctors. What seemed like a minor issue at first quickly escalated into a major health crisis. His heart, already weakened from the trauma of the accident and the stress of the last few months, was struggling. The doctors rushed in and immediately began working on him, but it became clear that this wasn't just a routine complication. Gregory's health was deteriorating much faster than anyone had anticipated. Sarah watched helplessly as doctors and nurses moved frantically around Gregory, trying to stabilize him. It was the first time she had seen him so vulnerable, so fragile. All the progress he had made, his emotional breakthroughs, his efforts to let go of his past, seemed to hang in the balance. She had become so invested in his recovery, not just as his caregiver, but as someone who genuinely cared for him, and the thought of losing him left her paralyzed with fear. As the hours passed, Gregory remained unconscious, and Sarah kept vigil by his side. The hospital room, which had once been filled with the sounds of machines and voices, now felt cold and silent. Sarah's thoughts spiraled. What if he didn't make it? What if all their hard work, all the progress he had made, was for nothing? Gregory's family, who had remained distant for so long, began to arrive at the hospital. His niece, Emily, was the first to appear. She looked shocked, her eyes wide with worry as she approached Sarah. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "He had a medical complication," Sarah replied, trying to keep her composure. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Emily nodded but said nothing more. Soon, Gregory's estranged siblings and other relatives began arriving, each one more concerned about their inheritance and control of the family business than about Gregory's condition. They had all but ignored him during his recovery, but Now that his life was in jeopardy, they were present, interested in the outcome for reasons other than love or concern. Emily was the only one who seemed to genuinely care about Gregory's well-being. She quietly sat by Sarah, offering her support in her own reserved way. As hours passed, the tension in the room grew. Doctors would come in and out, updating them with minimal information, all while Gregory remained unconscious. That night, after the doctors had left and the hospital was quiet, Sarah sat by Gregory's side, holding his hand. She whispered to him, urging him to fight. "I believe in you, Gregory," she said softly. "You fought so hard to get to this point. Don't give up now." She sat in the darkness, alone with her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that the life she had built with Gregory, helping him rediscover hope and purpose, was hanging by a thread. But Sarah refused to let fear control her. She had already seen the depths of his strength. He had survived so much, both physically and emotionally, and she wasn't going to let him give up now. Just as the night seemed to stretch on forever, a soft beep from the machine next to Gregory's bed caught Sarah's attention. She looked up, her heart racing, as she saw Gregory's eyes flutter open. At first it seemed like a dream, but as he blinked and focused on her, the reality of the moment set in. Gregory was awake. "Sarah." His voice was weak, but it was unmistakably his. Tears welled up in her eyes as she leaned closer to him. "You're awake. You made it." He smiled weakly. "I guess I'm not done yet, huh?" Sarah laughed softly, her heart lifting as she wiped away her tears. "No, you're not. You've got a lot more to do." The doctors rushed in to assess his condition, but the mood in the room shifted. The tension that had hung so heavily in the air began to dissipate. For the first time in weeks, Gregory seemed more like his old self. He was still fragile, but his mind was sharp. As the doctors confirmed that his condition was stabilizing, Gregory turned his gaze to Sarah. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't think I would have made it without you." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "You don't have to thank me. You did the hard work, Gregory. I just helped you find your way." In that moment, Sarah realized something profound. She had been there for Gregory through his darkest moments, but in a way, he had been there for her too. He had taught her about forgiveness, about letting go of the past, and about how to rebuild from nothing. The connection they shared was something neither of them had anticipated, but it had become something far more important than either of them could have imagined. Over the next few days, Gregory's recovery continued, and so did his transformation. His family remained in the background, but Emily, who had been the most supportive, continued to visit, her presence a reminder of the love that was still possible. Sarah remained by Gregory's side, watching as he worked through his physical therapy, slowly regaining strength and confidence. Though the crisis had been terrifying, it had brought them even closer together. It had also solidified Gregory's commitment to moving forward, no longer seeking revenge or holding on to the past, but instead focusing on what truly mattered: his future, his relationships, and his ability to help others. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: Gregory was ready to embrace it, with Sarah by his side. The weeks following Gregory's near-death experience were transformative, not only for him, but also for Sarah. The crisis had been a wake-up call for both of them. Gregory, who had once been consumed by anger and resentment toward his family, was now beginning to understand that his life needed to be defined not by the power he had lost, but by the relationships he had formed and the legacy he wanted to create. The weight of his family's abandonment, while still painful, no longer dictated his every decision. He was free, for the first time in years, to choose a path that was guided by compassion and purpose. As Gregory's physical recovery continued, he began to make changes in the way he viewed his life. No longer did he see himself as a helpless victim or a man desperate to reclaim what was lost. Instead, he began to see the possibility of a new beginning, one that wasn't built on business dealings and manipulation, but on creating something meaningful for others. The first step in this transformation came when Gregory made a bold decision. He contacted his family, those who had once been so eager to claim their part of his empire, and informed them that he would be relinquishing control of his businesses. He told them that he was no longer interested in continuing the legacy of wealth and power that had defined his life for so long. Instead, he wanted to create a new legacy, one that focused on giving back to the community and helping those who had been overlooked by society, just as he had been. At first, his family reacted with confusion and disbelief. They had expected him to fight for control, to assert his dominance as the patriarch of the Harrison Empire. But Gregory had no interest in that anymore. He no longer cared about power for the sake of power. Instead, he focused on something more enduring, the impact he could make on the world by using his resources to help others. Sarah, who had been by his side throughout this process, supported him every step of the way. She had watched him evolve, from a man consumed by his past to someone who was genuinely seeking redemption. It wasn't just his health that was healing, it was his soul. The man who had once plotted revenge against his family was now seeking to build something positive with the resources he had left. Together, they began to develop a foundation focused on social justice, helping those who had been wrongly imprisoned, like Sarah once had, and supporting the rehabilitation of ex-inmates who struggled to find work and rebuild their lives. Gregory, who had once believed that success was measured by financial gain, now saw that true success was found in helping others. The foundation he and Sarah started was only the beginning. As they worked together to establish it, they saw the profound impact they could have on others, especially on people who had been marginalized and forgotten by society. In the months that followed, Gregory's health stabilized, and his transformation was not only physical, but emotional. He no longer saw himself as a powerful businessman who needed to control everything. Instead, he found a new purpose in using his wealth and influence for good. He was no longer driven by the need to prove his worth to his family or the world. He was driven by a desire to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. Sarah, too, found her own sense of purpose through this journey. She had started out as Gregory's caregiver, someone who was just trying to make ends meet after years of being wrongfully imprisoned. But through her work with Gregory, she discovered her own voice and strength. She became a key figure in the Foundation, helping to lead efforts to reform the criminal justice system and provide support for those who had been wronged by the system. Her passion for helping others, born from her own experience, was what drove her to keep pushing forward. She knew, better than anyone, the power of second chances, and now she was determined to offer those chances to others. As their work continued, Gregory and Sarah found that the work they were doing together wasn't just changing the lives of the people they were helping, it was changing their own lives as well. They had both learned valuable lessons from their pasts, lessons about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of human connection. It was a bond between them that had grown stronger than they could have ever imagined. What had started as a professional relationship between caregiver and patient had transformed into a deep friendship, and, in time, something more. The foundation flourished, and Gregory became a powerful advocate for social justice reform. He spoke at conferences, met with lawmakers, and used his influence to change the conversation around criminal justice. No longer just a businessman, he had become a man who stood for something greater than himself. And Sarah, once an outcast from society, was now a voice of hope for those who had been forgotten. Through all of this, Gregory never forgot the person who had helped him rediscover his own humanity, Sarah. He knew that without her, he wouldn't have had the courage to make the changes he had. She had been the one who had shown him that redemption was possible, that it wasn't too late to change. And in return, Gregory had given Sarah the opportunity to do the same for others. Their journey together was one of transformation, not just for themselves, but for everyone they touched. In the end, Gregory's new legacy was one of compassion, forgiveness, and giving. He had found something far more valuable than the wealth he had once chased. He had found peace and purpose. And in Sarah, he had found someone who shared that vision, someone who had helped him see that life was not about what you lost, but about what you could give. Together, they had created a legacy that would live on far beyond their own lives, one that would continue to change the world for years to come.